After d4, d5, c4 and knight c6, we're playing Chigorin. In this video we're going to go through some stuff we haven't seen before so we can finally close the Chigorin saga forever. We're looking at the 4 knights game. We've seen this extensively, but after bishop g4 there's a move we've never seen before. And this gives birth to a few very crazy enforcing lines. They're very interesting to watch. Knight to e5 now. Okay, there's an attack on the bishop. And what to do now? What to do in this? This is one of the most played moves in this position. Here you have to take the knight. And after pawn takes back, it seems really uncomfortable here for black because, and that is the whole point of the move knight e5, is that now we have to move the knight, but then there's triple attack on this pawn. And what to do? It looks like we're in some trouble. We can't even play knight e4. That's why the best move here is d4. So we're counter-attacking. Now, two options we're going to look at. One of them is in case we get taken. The other one is the knight moving away. So let's see, if we get taken, we obviously need to take the knight. And a move like pawn takes in g7, like some sort of Zwischenzug, loses immediately because of bishop g7. That's it. Queen takes, rook takes, doesn't matter. You're keeping this pawn forever. You're threatening to take. If pawn takes you, you're taking and forking the king and the rook. So obviously it's a disaster. It doesn't make any sense. So in this position, what if queen takes straight away? Fine, take back. And now after pawn takes, there's the double attack, so you gotta take back with the bishop. And the pawn takes back, this is it. What's happening here? Castle. And basically everything has been traded off. That's the problem. However, we're playing the endgame with the bishop pair against this double up and isolated pawn. So that's a much better endgame for white. f3 attacking the bishop, trying to go e4. Well, bishop e6 comes now. And after e4, so that we can't take this pawn now, but we're going to play f5, we're going to capitalize on that. And so this is a winning endgame for black. Obviously, we're threatening to take, and then these two rooks are going to rule the world. If white pushes e5, the idea of playing f4, then you have to play f4 so that f4 by white doesn't come. And the idea here is to simply play bishop h4. So if bishop e2, bishop h4 check, this cannot be taken. And soon enough you'll be able to take this pawn and work against these two isolated pawns. So let's go back to this position. Instead of queen takes or pawn takes in g7, what if the pawn takes in e7? Well, here you take with the queen, and this is important. You threaten to play rook d8. Now white has to white will take the pawn back, obviously. So after pawn takes back, h5 comes by black. You'll see why in a second. Queen to b3, best move to develop and to attack the pawn. You just castle long. And you've got nothing to worry here. If white plays, let's say, any move, e3, which is now possible, obviously, rook d1 gives you a massive advantage because you're going to be giving the rook and the bishop for the queen. If white attacks the bishop, h3, you play bishop to d7. And now e3 seems to be possible, normal developing move, but now you play bishop c6. Bishop d2, developing. Also because this will allow our opponent to potentially castle. See, bishop e2 isn't really possible without losing this pawn. Queen to d7 comes now. And obviously castle now is not possible because bishop a4 just wins too much material. Rook b1 doesn't threaten anything. Besides, you're putting a lot of pressure on d2. So you may argue in this position, instead of e3 or h3, what if white plays the obvious rook b1 threatening mate? Well, b6 is necessary here. And after h3, bishop to f5, attacking the rook. Rook to b2, in order not to lose the open file and potentially play f3, e4. But now queen to e4. This basically pins the pawn in g, so our opponent can't develop in any possible way. If white tries to develop the bishop, let's say maybe here to e3. Well, then bishop to c5 wins the game. Our opponent cannot move a thing. f3 is impossible because of queen h4. Whatever our opponent does, then we can take in g2. The plan here for black is to simply play g5 and then g4 and just take everything. So from the start, d4, d5, c4, knight c6, shot knight c3, knight f6, the 4 knights, and now bishop g4. We're looking at the variation knight e5. Okay, so here we take, and after pawn takes back, we have to play d4. What if our opponent moves the knight to d5, b5, double attack on this pawn, whilst there's an attack on our knight? Seems like we're in big trouble here. Well, we keep attacking. c6. We don't care about being taken because then we can take back and position is better. Let's make an example. If pawn takes, obviously we take the knight. Best move now to take this pawn, because obviously there's a vision zook, so bishop has to take back. And now pawn takes back. What's happening here? We're just better. Castle. It looks like our king is not in a really good place. However, we're fully developed, that's the thing. And white cannot develop. Remember that. That's very important. This pawn cannot move to attack to develop the bishop. Let's look at this development. Queen to b3. Okay, rook to c8. Now obviously I move like bishop f4 to develop, just to make an example. You just play e5 and you're just so much better, as you can tell here in this position. If white plays bishop to g5, pinning this pawn, developing the bishop, seems to be making sense now. Queen to b6 is the best move. We don't care about the pawn in e7, because if takes, then rook e8, then the bishop will have to go back. But either way, now you play bishop f5, threatening d3, and winning the game on the spot, as you can see. That's just some samples of how the games might go, but you know the plans now, and you'll have to take it from there. And here, after knight to b5 in this position, we just played c6, and we looked at pawn taking the knight. You may say, okay, what about knight just taking the pawn back? Still, there's an attack on the knight, and we're down a pawn. Okay, well, check. And now, bishop blocks, queen e5. Bishop c3 looks dangerous. However, knight e4 just solves everything. This knight can't really move. Knight takes pawn in c6. There's an attack here. There's an attack on the queen. So here we play the crucial queen to c5. This is a great move, because it's threatening mate. So if the knight just saves itself, then you checkmate in f2. If instead knight back to d4 seems logical, but now e5, and that's it. Queen a4 check, counter-attacking, but now bishop d7 should close the deal. Knight to b5. Now we don't really have a checkmate. However, we are gonna take. King moves. Check. Pawn has to take. Long castle. And game over. And back in this position after bishop c3 with this attack. What if the knight doesn't go to c6? What if f3 with the fork? It seems like the initiative might be calmed down, because now we're forced to take this bishop. There's an attack on the queen, so pawn has to take back. And now we have to withdraw the bishop. It's bishop to d7. But position is still evaluated -2. There's a double isolated pawn, and we've got the bishop pair. There's absolutely no counterplay. There's just nothing at all by white. White will not have anywhere safe to castle anyway in this game. Let's look at this line now. We haven't seen this at all. So, still in the 4 knights, they play bishop g4. What about when they play bishop g5? Now, we have seen this extensively, but after knight e4, we've seen other moves like pawn takes, knight takes, and so on. We're going to look at this novelty now, which is kind of similar in a way to what we've just seen. Knight e5. Okay, well, take. Pawn takes back. And now you take this knight. There's an attack on the queen, so pawn has to take. And now you take this pawn. And we've created this. This is a double pawn, and this is an isolated pawn to play in the endgame. Queen check, recapturing this pawn seems to be making sense. Queen blocks. Takes, and now long castle. White can't really develop the bishop to e3 because they've got so much attack over d1. We're going to checkmate. Queen to d3, trying to swap and fix the pawn structure, for instance, but he played just queen to c6. And now the queen will have to move again. If queen goes to c2, normal move, typical for queen's gambit positions. Defending that pawn, you're going to play g6 and you're going to pile up the attack on the diagonal. f4 by white, f6. And we are going to free up the diagonal. Pawn takes, the bishop has to move. And now bishop to b4 closes the deal. And it's all like this could be defended more with rook c1, for example, because he will just win the exchange, right? Rook goes to b1, but then bishop f5 ends the game. If rook goes to d1 instead, well, then you can just take it, right? Queen cannot take because this pawn falls, but then the king has to take back. But now the rook has been eliminated, so after the check, you can bring the bishop back to b4, and you conclude the job. So in this position, after queen to c6, what if the queen goes to g3, attacks the bishop, and still defends this pawn? Besides, what we're going to do? Okay, bishop to f5, and now bishop to d2 to defend the pawn, e6. Now a move like e3 loses immediately because of queen d5, putting pressure on this bishop, and we're going to checkmate unless white plays, I don't know, rook d1 to defend it, but then you can win material, and you can take it from there. So obviously e3 loses. A move like rook to d1 now seems logical, but you just play bishop c2, right? And this is happening no matter what. The rook will have to move, but now you play queen a4. Position evaluated minus 450, if that tells you something. So back in this position, we're in that place where the four knights and white plays the bishop g5 move. We play knight e4 and white plays knight e5. We took the knight in e5, and earlier we went through pawn takes back. What about when the knight takes here? And now you still have a knight under attack. What to do? This is really dangerous. Okay, still play knight to c4. This is the best move. Queen a4 check, c6. This is how you need to play. Let's make an example of a developing move. e3 loses immediately because of knight b6. And obviously you got an attack on the queen and an attack on the knight, so you're winning material. If instead of e3 here, for instance, white plays knight to c5 to save the knight. This seems to be making sense. Okay, fine, take the pawn in b2. The knight is not going to get trapped. Queen b3 looks like he makes a fork. Looks really horrible. This is the kind of position that I will never go through if I didn't know that this was the right moves. Like in a game in this position, I'd be really scared. You just go back with knight c4, and after queen to b7, feels a lot of pressure, but you completely miss queen a5 check. And that's what happens when you don't castle the king. Well, also, we are not castled either. Anyway, king to d1. Obviously, the bishop couldn't block. Rook to c8 is the best move. It's protected by the bishop, and it protects the pawn in c6. Just hold on. f3 now. Okay, well, queen to c3, and this was inevitable. With attacking this rook, we're going to win the game. Rook to c1 with an attack on the queen. Well, knight to b2 wins the queen, as you can tell. What about instead of rook c1, what if knight to b3 now to protect the rook? Well, knight b2 is mate. Now let's make a recap so I can show something else, something that happened to me, a line that happened to me that I know very well actually. But I was like, it was kind of new. So bishop g5, knight e4, the variation where they don't play knight e5 but rather just take this knight. Now obviously you need to take back, and now after knight e5 now, you take, and now bishop d7 is the best move. Now what about f3? I encountered this move recently and I was a bit annoyed by it because my opponent is threatening to triple up his own pawn, which is terrible. However, I felt kind of suffocated. Now here he play e6, and after pawn takes h6, the bishop has to move. Let's look at two lines. If the bishop goes to f4 to protect that pawn forever, and white will try to retain the material advantage, play bishop a4 attacking the rook, inducing b3. But even if b3 doesn't happen, you're going to play bishop c6. So even if the opponent moved the rook, that would have been worse. But now you're going to be taking this one. Rook d4 is not possible because the dark square bishop will come into play. So in this position, instead of bishop f4, what about bishop to d2? Okay, same thing. Bishop a4 attacks the rook, b3, and bishop to c6. e3 now to develop the bishop. You just take here, and that's it. The position is just much better for black. There's nothing else to do actually. The game plays itself is much better for black. So still from the same line, in this position, instead of the line with knight e4, what about the one? What about this one? We haven't seen this one before. So white just played bishop g5. We played knight e4, and white now can take in d5. Okay, fine. You have to take this one. There's an attack on the queen, so pawn takes back, queen takes back, and now we're threatening to take the knight and then win the bishop. So after bishop f4, castle long. Queen to b3, putting pressure on b7, also threatening to swap and open the file for the rook. What to do in this type of position? f6. And you'll see why in a second. Rook to b1, threatening mate. b6. We really don't care about swapping the queens. If they want to, that's fine for us. e3. And now e5. That's why f6. e5. And we're threatened to just swap all the pawns, and then bishop can go to b4 with check. The rook can come into play. What if white plays bishop to c4? Well, here's the crazy variation that is about to happen. Be very careful to what you're about to see. And never forget, bishop takes it f3 is the move now. Hehe. How about that? Completely careless of the queen. Our opponent is left with the only choice of having to accept the sacrifice, because then otherwise would be going to f3. with an attack on the rook. So bishop takes queen, bishop takes back with an attack on the queen, queen a4, and now we take this bishop. Okay, so taking doesn't really make sense since you'll be able to remove our opponent's right to castle. But not just that, you're also attacking g2. Then after the check, our opponent can't go to f1. It's pretty tragic. So what about castle, right? Okay, knight a5 is the best move. And after pawn takes in f4, so what to do now? a6. Rook f to c1. Bishop to c6, attacking the queen. Queen moves away. Knight to c4. And here's what you need to remember. No black piece can possibly be attacked by a pawn. And I mean it. Like, this pawn can attack the bishop, yes, but it's just like very well attacked. There is no counterplay, basically. Queen to d3. Best moves, but still pointless. Bishop to d5. That's it. a4 by white. Try to disrupt our king side, our king. a4, g6, a5, b5. That's how you play it. There's no counterplay. f5. These are all moves trying to open the files, which will be interesting because white will have two rooks, so that's what white will want to do. Bishop to d6, develop. And giving this pawn away is fine, because after take back, you're going to have a lot of pressure here. And black is completely winning this game. There is no way for our opponent to ever capture one of our pieces without having to give up material, without having to give up the material advantage they got before. After d4, d5, c4, knight c6, we're playing the Chigorin. In this video, we're going to go through all the things we haven't seen so far. So after knight f3 now, we know we have to play bishop g4. And now there's a few lines we haven't seen at all. Let's start with, okay, when the pawn takes here in d5, as you remember, you need to take this knight. Now there's two ways to take back. One of them is pawn e takes the bishop. We have never seen this before. Or the other one is this pawn, the g pawn takes. We have seen this before, but after queen d5 and e3, we know we have to play the thematic e5. We have triple attack on the pawn in d4. Our opponent has to continue development, bishop. Also because there's no other way to protect this pawn. Okay, the pawn in d4. So knight to c4, we pin the knight. Bishop d2 unpins it. So obviously we need to take, and after pawn takes back, white has got a huge center of pawns in exchange of the fact that white cannot castle anywhere safe. So we play queen d6 now, and now let's go on. What to do? White cannot really push the c pawn because then we got triple attack on d4. Cannot really push the e pawn. Moving the f pawn doesn't make any sense, as you can tell, because you're going to castle long and this king will be under a huge attack. So after the development, bishop to h3, stopping us from castling. This is the most popular move here. Knight to e7, develop. Castle, castle. Okay, king h1. This is the only plan that our opponent can do, which is king h1 and then the rook in g1, piling up the attack on the king. But now you play knight to g6. Remember, we never take this pawn unless our opponent makes the first move. Rook to g1 now. This is going to be pointless because, rook g1 doesn't do anything. And there was nowhere else to put the rook anyway. The rook here was stuck behind these two pawns, meaning that we already have a positional advantage since the very start. Rook a to d8. Rook b1 attacking the weak pawn in b7. Fine, b6. That's it. Okay, queen a4. Developing the queen. How are we going to get a more serious advantage now? Okay, play knight c to e7. And you don't care about the pawn in a7, obviously. Let's make an example. If queen does take, rook a8, and now the queen is trapped everywhere she can go except the square b7. But now you play f5, and the queen is trapped. The only thing left to do for white is to give up the bishop, and after winning the bishop, the only thing left to do for white is to give the bishop, and then knight takes back, and our opponent will have a safety. Somewhere safe to go, but we're going to be up a piece. The threat obviously is to play rook to b8. And bear in mind that there's no other moves to play. Like, here's the thing, what you need to understand is that our opponent has no moves. Bishop g2 is pointless. Bishop f1 just doesn't really do anything. This bishop could go to e1 or c1, but none of these moves makes any sense. Pawn cannot go to c4, you will take in d4. Pawn cannot go to e4 either. Pawn d5 gets taken. Pawn f4, and then you can take and smash the opponent pawn structure even more. There's really nothing to do. The rook cannot infiltrate and go anywhere that makes any sense. So let's just make an example. Let's say queen to b3, best move, but now you play knight to h4 with an attack on the pawn in f3. The rook can't really go to g3, because then after you attack the rook again, then you're winning the exchange. A move like bishop g2, but now you just play knight e to g6. And the plan is to simply play c5 and swap with all of those pawns. Position evaluated as if black was almost up a piece. So let's move on. Let's take it from the start. We're going to see a move we haven't seen at all. So bishop g4, take, and now the e pawn taking. Now we haven't seen this because this is slightly worse, but let's look at it. Queen takes back, and now white has already an isolated pawn. We're attacking it twice, and there's no way to defend it anymore, except bishop to e3 is the only move. But now you play e5. And now the best thing to do is to take this pawn, basically. However, let's look at it this way. Knight c3 developing, bishop to b4 pinning, and now pawn takes. Like, that move will have, even if white had taken the pawn, you can still just give a check with the bishop. Knight c3, and it's a perfect transposition. So these moves are going to happen anyway. Now here we take back with the queen, no reason to swap pieces. Two options we're going to look at. One of them is bishop e2, rushing development. The other one is queen to b3. Because obviously we've got two pieces attacking the knight. So bishop e2, you just take the knight. Pawn takes back, queen takes check, bishop blocks, and now queen back to e5. And it's already trouble, because basically if white does castle, you're going to castle long, and now this bishop is pinned and it's game over. The bishop can't move. I mean, the queen will have to move. If white, let's say, plays rook e1 to make an example, queen b2 ends the game. Double attack on the bishop can't move, cannot be protected any further, you win a piece for free. If instead here white saves the queen to c1, obviously you got this bishop, but if the queen goes to e1, that is the only move that saves the game for the moment, but black is still already better, like position evaluated -2. You play knight d4, there's double attack on that bishop, so the bishop will have to move. Bishop d3 here is not good, because you'll simply take this with check. We're attacking the queen, so the only move is to take back. Now queen takes, and then we're going to have an attack on this bishop, an attack on the following one. There is no back rank mate, obviously. There is a much better prospect of endgame for black. So in this position, instead of bishop e3, what is bishop e1? Okay, take, and now knight f6. You could do this move as well, but obviously this knight f6 is the stronger move. Bishop to c3 looks like a good move because it's attacking this, spinning the knight, because then bishop wants to maybe take the knight and double up and isolate our pawns. You're going to play rook h to e8. And now a move like bishop to a4, so that the rooks can connect. The bishop's coming and attacking the rook. Doesn't work because knight e2 wins the exchange, right? You're threatening to win the bishop completely for free. So rook has to take the knight, and then you take back, you win in the exchange. Instead, what if the rook takes our rook? We obviously need to take back with the knight and going for a winning endgame. We got an extra pawn, and look at this majority, 3 against 1. You're going to win the game like that. Once again, position evaluated -250. So you're very comfortable in this endgame. So back in this position, instead of bishop e2, which allows us to take this knight and go for that attack, what about queen to b3? Thematic move. However, you can now play long castle. And after bishop e2 now, knight to d4 comes. It's attacking the queen, threatening to take this knight. The king will be exposed and will be in some huge trouble. So the bishop kind of has to take. And I take back with the rook, and it looks like our opponent is just fine. But remember, white cannot castle. Okay, okay. What else is there to do? Black's position is so much better, if you notice. Now here, you can't really take this knight with the threat of taking the bishop, because the pawn will be attacking the rook. So you play queen e6. Crazy enough, I was very surprised to see this move. Asking for a swap without queen. And it looks like queen takes and pawn takes. We've just isolated our own pawn. However, this is just much better for black. Rook f to d1. What to do now? Crazy enough, take. And we're done in development, basically. But we still have a clear majority here. Now, white has got 4 pawns here, but no possibility to produce a passed pawn anytime soon. We have 3 against 2, which is a clear difference. Also, we take this one, pawn takes back, and now those 2 pawns are looking really bad. Knight f6. Okay, bishop c4, targeting the weak pawn. Rook e8, defending it. Rook e1 attacks that pawn more. Bear in mind that this is white having played only Stockfish best moves all the way until now. King d7 comes now, and black is slightly better and has the better chances in this endgame. You're ready to play knight d5, putting crucial pressure on c3, and we'll have to take the game from there. Obviously, your opponent is not going to play like Stockfish for 18 moves in a row, so we can leave it there. You're supposed to have grabbed an advantage much earlier than this. Anyway, here, back in this position, instead of rook f to d1 with all the swap situation, what if white tries to preserve the integrity of these 2 pawns and plays knight to e4? This seems to be making sense. Okay, knight f6. If white takes us, we fix the pawn structure, we're happy. Knight to g5, attacks this pawn, attacks f7, puts pressure on h7, but nothing's going to happen. Rook to d2 comes now. Attacking the bishop, bishop c4, finalizing the attack on this square. Take the pawn. Check. King moves. Rook a b1, looking for swap. We can't take in a2. Take, and now rook d8. King f1, only move here, and now white is threatening to take this bishop. a5 protects it. Knight s7 attacks the rook. What to do? Rook e8, attacking the bishop. Bishop has to go back to b3. King a7. Once again, we will win because of this majority, but you have to play accurate. This is white having played only Stockfish moves all the way so far, which is why I kept this variation for the end of this saga. It's the very best that white can get, yet black is still better. One more variation about that line, that type of scenario. Bishop g4, take. In the past, we've been through also pawn takes in c6 with taking the knight. Okay, we have to take back with the bishop, obviously. And after knight c3, e5, d5, we have to play bishop d7. A move we haven't seen so far is e4 right now, creating a stronger center. And after e4, knight f6, a move we have seen bishop g5 now and bishop e2. But bishop e3, we've never seen it before. This is because, obviously, we have a plan of playing bishop c5 straight away. Bishop e3 stops that, it develops a piece, so it's a very good move. What to do? Well, okay, if they do that move, you know that you want to go to c5 with the bishop, right? If you remember. So bishop e3, you just play knight g4. And that bishop has lost the tempo, because when he retreats, then bishop c5 puts pressure on this square, and black is so much better already. So the bishop will kind of have to stay there. Bishop e2, double attack on the knight, developing. Take. Bishop c5 comes anyway, putting pressure on this pawn. Queen d3 protects it and prepares development. Queen h4 check. G3. Queen h3 infiltrating. Castle long. Looks like this is a completely playable position for white. And it's not too bad, but the thing is that after queen h6, which is now inevitable, we're just going to capitalize on that pawn. King d2 is a bit crazy to play. Our opponent has an idea of playing knight a4, but then we can take it. So our bishop cannot really be kicked out. a3, b4 would be very slow. And if that happens, you can just prevent it with a5. So this king will be stuck in that square forever. So it's not worth it. King to b1. Going to get some safety. Take. With up a pawn, but our opponent might try to keep playing. If white plays knight to b5, threatening to go to c7, you just castle long, and black is considerably better here. If instead, back in this position, instead of accepting the trade, our opponent had played queen to c4, refusing the trade, bishop to d6, rook h to e1, preparing an attack on the queen simply goes back to b6. We've got the bishop pair and an extra pawn. Our king is safe, and we'll have to take it from there. Now this is quite an open endgame with the bishop, so everything can happen. But needless to say, our opponent cannot make any progress with that position. A brief mention has to be made of a move that is a bit unusual, but actually it can kind of be confusing. After knight f3 here, we know we have to play bishop g4. What if they protect it with the knight in d2? Now this is unnatural, because the knight is supposed to go in c3 in a d4 d5 d4 c4 game because of the extra pressure on d5. That's the whole point. But the knight can go here in order to protect the knight in f3 and take back. What to do now? e6, and after h3 attacking the bishop, we retreat the bishop. So obviously it doesn't make any sense to take that knight. Now two options we're going to look at. One of them is g4, right? Attacking the bishop. Fine, bishop to g6, stay on that crucial diagonal. Bishop g2 developing, h5, and that is the key move to remember. Obviously, we want to take, and after all the swaps, this king will have nowhere safe the castle, whereas the black player always has the queen side in the Chigorin. g5, closing the line. Well, okay, bishop b4, pinning the knight. a3, attacking the bishop. What was the point of bishop b4? To take this knight. And now this cannot be taken with the knight, simply because knight d4 is a crucial, completely free pawn with a threat of knight c2, bishop c2, are both doable moves. Bishop c2 wins the queen. If our opponent swaps, then he will be in massive trouble. Okay, if instead the bishop takes, bishop e4. And the goal is very simple. We want to win this pawn for free. And there's a bishop covering the queen. That means that, even if the pawn takes us, then after take back, gonna have double attack on e3. If this pawn is protected like that, you just take the pawn in c4. There is no compensation here. After taking this knight, you can also take this pawn, and the position is falling apart for black. Needless to say, in this position, if the queen are taken back, this is bad, because now you are gonna take the pawn in. You are gonna take the pawn, but now this bishop can't develop. Castling this side is really stupid. b3 or b4 maybe, in order to develop from the fianchetto, but even then, let's see, for example, if white does play b4, you take en passant, and after bishop b2, white might say, you know what, I'm down 2 pawns, but I've got the bishop pair, and I'm gonna just develop. There's nothing here. Knight e7, the idea of going to d5, from where the knight will be conquering glory. d5 with the discovered attack on g7, this could be interesting. After queen takes, bishop takes b2, now rook to g8 attacks the bishop will have to move again. We're gonna win because of this very strong pass pawn. Position evaluated -3 for a reason. So let's take it from the start, once again from this scenario. So bishop g4, knight d2, e6, and after h3 we move the bishop to f5 instead of g4. Now let's look at this other move, queen to b3. What to do now? And now we understand part of the plan. Why bishop to f5 instead of h5? h5 is stupid, doesn't pin anything. f5 attacks this crucial square. If you've been watching these Chigorin videos of this saga, then you've seen this bishop being one of the strongest pieces on the board. Now we play knight b4. It's protected by the bishop, and knight c2 is just too much of a threat. e4 is the best move. It's the only move the engine comes up with. We have to take with the bishop, and after take, this knight will have to move. Knight e5 loses immediately because of queen d4 attacking the knight. It's an amazing position. And it's not like after queen d4 you can say white will go on with development bishop f4 with the idea of rook d1, and it looks actually really good for white because of development. But now bishop c5 threatening to go to f2, bishop g3 protecting f2 and still keeping an eye on the knight. Rook to d8 now just simply stops rook d1 from happening. Let's make an example. Rook to d1, fine, take, knight a2. White has got nothing, no attacks. We've got already a majority. Position evaluated -4, in case that wasn't enough. We also got quite a great material advantage, as you notice. So back in this position, after pawn takes back, we went through knight e5, it loses because of queen d4. What about a3, best move, which is counterattacking the knight? Fine, you take this knight, and after the pawn takes you, c6 is the best move. Now this is white's absolute best variation in this faulty variation. So b5 by white, trying to dismantle this strong pawn, trying to isolate our pawn. Knight e7, we want to take the pawn like that. Let's look at a couple of options just to make a point here. Pawn takes, knight takes, and queen takes b7 doesn't lose a pawn for black, because bishop b4 check wins the game immediately. This king can't go here. Going here means queen to d4, ending the game very, very soon. Bishop blocks is stupid because take, blah, blah, and you finish it off. So in this position, after knight e7, what about bishop e3 developing? Fine, knight f5, attacking the bishop. Castle long. White's got like a lot of pawns in the center. Didn't take this pawn in f3 yet because it will damage the pawns. Actually, white will want us to take, and then the bishop takes back, becoming really strong. We're going to play g6 though. And now, okay, let's look at this variation. Pawn takes in f3. you play bishop to g7, and we're going to put a lot of pressure over here. Looks like now pawn takes in c6 is possible, but you just got to take back. And this rook is about to become very strong. d5 now, the idea to open the file so that the rook will be attacking the queen. Ignore it, play rook b8. And now the opponent will have to move. And we're threatening to go queen a5 from where we will be really strong. And besides, if the queen moves away, bishop b2, rook cooperating, ends the game. And this obviously cannot be refused with, let's say, pawn takes, because now you will do this, rook takes. And obviously, if the rook takes here, this rook is not going to be recaptured, so you're winning a rook at the end of this. So that's just a sample of potential moves. Let's look at one more line, and then we can finally close this video. It's the following one. So after knight f3 and bishop g4, a move I encountered recently in a game was this one. Queen a4 straight away, pinning the knight. And what to do in this instance. So obviously we take the knight. We hate them, so we take them. Two ways to take back. So let's say if the e-pawn takes, then you take this one in c4. Crazy enough. Bishop takes. Okay, we have isolated this pawn successfully, but our opponent is better developed. So e6 is the right move now. And after bishop e3 developing, ready to castle, a6, threatening b5, winning a piece. A move like queen c2 now is really bad, because you will just take the pawn in d4 completely for free. There's no poison, no nothing. A move like queen to d1 to save from the future fork. Obviously queen b3, we're not going to look at this, because then we will win the bishop pair. I mean, queen b3 is also possible, but then you play knight f6, and after castle, well, okay, the queen cannot take the pawn in b7, because knight a5 is a fork, right? So after castle, b5, bishop goes back, bishop d3, and now you can win this pawn for real. There's nothing to fear after taking this pawn. Everything's fine. Queen to c3 puts pressure on c6, so we can't really go back to c6. You have to play c5, and you have a majority here. Now, this is going to be an open endgame, so everything can happen. There is no compensation for the pawn lost by white. However, you'll have to take it from here. There's too many moves that can happen now. So let's make an example. Rook d1, queen to b6, putting more pressure on more defensive at d4. Bishop, well, will not go to e2, obviously. Bishop f1. And now there's three attackers over here, but you're going to play knight f5 for that reason. Pawn c5 is well defended. We're threatening to remove the bishop pair from our opponent, and the advantage is now being consolidated. So in this position, instead of queen b3 or queen c2, what about queen back to d1? Okay, knight e7, develop, castle, and knight f5. That was the whole point. Knight to c3, develop. And now you take this pawn completely for free, so there was nothing. Rook to e1, continuing development, because white will have to compensate for the lost pawn. c6 comes now to stop any annoying future jumps of the knights. g4 to kick this knight away. Will our opponent be able to capture this knight completely for free? That's why c6 was suspicious, because now looks like we're gonna have to remove this knight, and then this knight in d4 will fall. However, knight to h4 comes now, and the knight is not falling at all. If anything, we're finalizing the pressure over f3, and this cannot be taken because you can just take back. And you see, there's no compensation, except we won one more pawn. So let's take it from the start, and let's look at the very last line. So here, queen a4 straight away, you take the knight. And let's look at g pawn takes. Okay, now again, we take this pawn, so it's a pattern. Now queen takes back means that we are going to win this pawn in d4 for free. There's no compensation at all. Let's look at two moves here, e4 or e3. e4 to take more center. Well, you just take this pawn, it's not poison. Bishop takes back, obviously swapping pieces doesn't make sense for white. e6, knight c3, developing, bishop e4, the usual moves. Queen to b3, obviously because now we're threatening to take the bishop for free. Queen to b3, long castle. This Chigorin is just the best. Bishop e3, developing with an attack on the queen. Queen f6, targeting this weak pawn. Bishop to b5 with the idea of smashing the pawn side, the queen side here, and ruining our pawns. Knight to d4 is now necessary, threatening to go to f3 as well, threatening the queen, so it has to be taken. Rook takes back, and a move like a3 now is met with bishop to a5, so the bishop doesn't have to worry, and we are finally going to f3 no matter what, unless you think our opponent can move some stuff. Let's say what knight d2 cannot really happen to attack the rook and defend f3 with the queen because the knight is pinned. Bishop to f2, fine. Knight to e7, position evaluated -4 by the way. Queen going to c2 now. Let's look at this one. The idea of to play b4, removing this very strong bishop so that the white knight can play rook h to d8, b4, bishop to b6, and now rook to d1. Looks like it finalizes the attack, and our opponent might find some peace. However, rook takes, bishop takes, and knight to g6. Position is evaluated -5. The plan here is to simply play queen g5, queen g2. Let's look at something a little bit different now. c4, knight c6, knight c3. As we know, we play knight f6, and now the immediate bishop to g5. Now we have to take the pawn in c4, and we're going to look at two options. One of them is pawn to d5, double attack on the knight, considering that now we have double attack on this pawn. The other one is knight to f3, defending that pawn and continuing development. Now, as we know, after d5 we have to play knight a5, and after e4, what to do now? Okay, h6, attacking the bishop. This bishop could either go back or swap. If the bishop goes back, c6 is the key move to remember. If they take, we can obviously take back, everything is fine, and this pawn in c4 is going to be protected. Knight f3, g5, the bishop has to move, bishop to g7, that's how we develop. So if pawn takes, let's make an example. Okay, first take the rook, rook takes back, and now, crazy enough, knight to c6. That means we are preserving the integrity of the pawn structure. However, we're going to give up this pawn. But now you play bishop g4, pins the knight. Castle, castle. And remember that here you have the familiar tactic. So for example, here, what to do now? Let's continue. e5, attacking this knight. This looks good for white. And after attacking our bishop, white is dreaming to play rook d7 with a dominant position. You play knight h5, removing the bishop pair from the opponent. And there's nothing to do now. We got so much attack over this pawn, and we're also going to take this bishop. So what about e6? Let's look at this move. Take with the bishop, crazy enough. Bishop takes back, pawn takes back. Rook to d7 happened for real. Now we have to take this bishop. Pawn takes back. Rook a to b8, defend the pawn. How is it possible that we deliberately chose to go through such an endgame? We got this double isolated pawn, but we have the bishop for the knight at least in an open endgame. Let's continue. Rook f to d1, king f7. And you don't have to worry about any checks. There's nothing. Knight e4, coming closer, attacking the square d6. The pawn is pinned, threatening to go to b7. None of this actually works. Rook f to d8. Just claim the swap of these rooks, swap everything, and you go and win the endgame because of the extra pawn. Knight to d6, check. King to g6. King is ready to fight for the endgame. And now, taking this one doesn't work because the knight is pinned. So take, it's got a free rook. So knight takes the pawn also doesn't work because you can take this one. Crazy enough. Looks like now rook takes. Well, fine. Take back, and now this. And this is white having played the best moves in a faulty variation. So that was just a bad, that's just a bad setup for white. But even with the best moves, you're gonna win the game no matter what. In this position, after h6, what if the white player takes the knight, which is one of the points of playing bishop g5. Okay, take back with the e pawn, and again, this pawn cannot be taken. In fact, when that happens, take back, queen a4 makes a fork, and as we know, this familiar pattern, white should be recapturing that knight, and it will do. Queen d7 is the way to block, because after queen takes, now you play queen to g4. Attacking the square g2, that is the weakness we're working on. Okay, knight to b5, attacking c7. This looks tragic. What to do? Okay, bishop d6 saves everything. Don't worry about the pawn getting isolated. Doesn't matter. g3 has to happen. Castle. Knight to d6. Take. We got isolated pawn. That's fine. Knight to e2. Starts the development and prepares to long castle. Because that earlier wasn't impossible. Queen f3. Now long castle. What to do? Looks like a normal game, but now bishop f5 is the key move to win the game. Obviously, we're threatening rook c1, winning the game. If not, we are going to take this pawn for free, going to b1. Look for checkmate. There is no way to avoid it. Knight d4 seems to be making a fork to the queen, and bishop seems to be a nice counterattack, but now queen to e4. And we're still threatening rook c1, winning the game. I mean, rook c8, winning the game. There is nothing. The king can't even move. If the rook attacks our queen, you're going to play rook f to c8. The difference is simple. If they take you, you're going to take this queen with check, and then you're going to recapture the rook. If they take the rook, then you recapture with check. Once again, your queen is safe. So these are just sample moves. Obviously, I don't claim that the games will go exactly like that. However, you know all the patterns and how to exploit it. That's your duty to learn. Knight f6, bishop g5. What to do now? We take this pawn. Earlier we went through d5. What about knight f3? Completely normal move. Okay, h6 once again. Bishop h4, g5. Bishop g3, a6. We want to play b5, obviously, to keep the pawn chain. e4, conquering the center. Bishop g7. It looks like we are giving this pawn away. Why didn't we play b5? That's fine. You play knight h5. That is the theme of the day. Castle. Take. The rook is now in an open file, attacking together with this bishop. Knight g5 is a very strong threat. What to do? g4. Well, you see, if knight goes here, you can take this pawn. You see, you got so much attack, and then you're going to castle. So knight g5 isn't going to do. Knight e5, let's see, for instance. Take, e6. We don't care about losing the right to castle, because after take back, we're just going for a winning endgame. Even after rook takes f7, which is apparently crazy. However, bishop e5. Rook a to f1. It looks so much better for white, but it's not. King to e8. Attacks the rook. Although the rook is defended, but you will see now. Knight to d1 is the only move here, because you want to be able to reach some squares, like attacking here. Maybe knight f2, going to d3. Because there is nowhere else to go. The knight here in c3. There's nowhere else to go. Knight e4 comes with a fork. Knight d5 is not possible. Knight e2 is not going anywhere. Unless you think maybe knight f4. But the thing is that when knight f4 happens, you're going to take this rook. That's the thing. Knight d1. Okay, bishop to d7. Knight e3. You just play bishop to d4. And you're winning the knight. Simple as that. This rook cannot go in. No rook can defend that knight without a rook being taken. So what about knight f2 instead? b5 attacks the bishop. Bishop b3 keeps the pressure on the weak pawn. h5. Knight to d3 seems to be possible finally. Okay, check. King moves. c5, threatening c4. What to do? Knight f4, fine, you take this rook. And you have this majority against the minority here, even if the knight had gone somewhere else. So in this position, earlier we went through knight e5 here. What about d5, counterattacking on the knight? Now here you play knight e5. We have an attack on this knight, we have an attack on this knight like that. So after knight finally takes like this, you take back. The knight looks like white's pawn's a little bit better. What to do? d6 discovers an attack on f7. e6. Okay. Pawn takes in c7. Take. And now bishop takes back. This is winning for black. We've got the bishop pair, and our opponent has an isolated pawn. This is the... And also there's no infiltration of the white pieces. Just absolutely no way. The only thing left to do will be something like e5 with idea knight e4, knight e6. The thing is, you're going to take it, right? So we're going to drop this line here.